by Dr. Damir, ČRNČEC, Associate Professor, Graduate School of Government and European Studies, Slovenia.
Dobro jutro. Jaz sem naučil od Crne Gori, da mogu do 12 da kažem dobro jutro. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the panel number 4 entitled Reshaping Security System in Order to Meet Contemporary Terrorism Threats. Allow me to start by expressing my sincere appreciation to our host for having us here today to address this very important topic in our societies for more than a decade, and in which for sure is going to stay for another decade or so. A group of distinguished panelists will help to assess how successful we are in finding the right answers to the contemporary terrorism threats. With us today is Dr. Juliette, Head of Counter-Terrorism Section, Emerging Security Challenges Division at NATO. His Excellency, Dr. Zoran, JOLEVSKI, Minister of Defense of Macedonia. Her Excellency, Professor Dr. Milica Pejanović-Jurišić, Minister of Defense of Montenegro. And General John Allen, Special Presidential Envoy for the Global Coalition to Counter-ISIL, U.S. Department of State. Please. We are living in globalized, interdependent, multipolar world, a world in which we face an altered, unpredictable security environment. A world where there are 3.1 billion internet users, people who in the Freedman's right world can access the same information at the same time wherever they are in the global village. We are living in the world of 6 billion mobile phone users. A world where information technology and social networks are triggering dramatic changes in our societies, economics, and consequently security. However, numerous positive effects of our early 21st century world come also with risks and threats. Namely, people who refuse to share the same values are using technological progress against our own societies. The internet and mobile phones technologies, unfortunately, can serve also as a tool of radicalization, propaganda, exchanging messages, etc. Consequently, we can paradoxically call them, among other things, also a terrorist weapon. We all witnessed that when 9/11 Al-Qaeda terrorist modus operandi was revealed in the public, and we can observe it nowadays in the case of, however you call it, ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, and other active terrorist organizations in Syria, Iraq, Libya, and elsewhere. Going back a little bit to history, short history, do you still remember that we used to have a global war on terror? Phrase quietly faded away, but the terrorist threats are still here. From Afghanistan, Iraq, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Syria, still the list does not end there. Do you remember how we Europeans used to be from Venus and the Americans from Mars? And how nowadays we don't talk anymore about axis of evil, but the caliphate. In our countries, we follow the UN resolutions, we have amended the national legislation, we have changed the national security systems, we have adopted and implemented counter-terrorism strategies. And so the important question that arises at that point is the following. Where are we now and where we are going? And I said a group of distinguished panelists will help us find the answers. Allow me to start with General Allen. General, you are heading a global anti-ISIL coalition of more than 16 countries. Last year you said ISIS is a clear and present danger to the US. General, isn't ISIS clear and present danger to all of us? General, how do you manage in practice this global coalition of 60 countries? Do you have a strategy to counter ISIL? And how is the leading this type of coalition comparing to what you used to do as a four-star general?
Well, first, thank you very much for permitting me to be part of this panel. Madam Minister, let me say that this is a great year for 2BS. It's the fifth year, a year of celebration in that regard. This is my second year, so I can say that I have been honored to be here for 40% of the process of 2BS. So it's a great year for you all in the fifth year of celebration. Let me also add my voice to what I think is becoming a deafening chorus of support for Montenegro to join NATO. As the commander of NATO's field force in Afghanistan, I served with the troops of many of the countries in this room, and they were magnificent. But to have had the chance to look in the eyes of the Montenegrin troops and to see the character of those young soldiers was a great honor for me. I don't think many of the people in this audience know that the force was about 150,000 when I was there. But when you total up the per capita contribution of any one country, Montenegro was one of the largest contributors to the NATO field force in ISAF. Let me now talk about the coalition. The term ISIL is used in the title of the coalition, but I'll use the Arabic acronym Daesh because it has become more broadly accepted. About this time last year, about a year ago, the United States began to evaluate some very disturbing reports that this organization had come across the Syrian border, had run into some very light Iraqi resistance, and was making some real headway and inroads into Iraq. On the 6th of June and to the 10th of June, they were moving on Mosul. On the 10th of June, Mosul fell. A city of 1.5 million people went down to Daesh. And from that moment until this, it has been largely on the march. We can talk about the specific state of Daesh today and the so-called caliphate. But it created a sequence of events which ultimately brought the United States into a bombing campaign to try to stop the momentum, to buy time ultimately to do two things. One was to stop the collapse of Iraq, which was well underway at the time, and the other was to put together a global coalition. Now, I credit the 13 years we served together in ISAF and the time that NATO was the organizing principle for the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan as having created the platform of interoperability that permitted so many nations so quickly, 62 nations and 2 partners, to come together in this global coalition. And that coalition came together in the latter part of September, and your question was, do we have a strategy? And the answer is yes. It's a pressure strategy, which over a long period of time, because we anticipate this will not be a short campaign, will ultimately degrade and defeat Daesh. The coalition is organized around 5 principal lines of effort. And what I think most of you are most familiar with is the military line. And in the Q&A, we can come back to discuss the details of any one of them. But the 5 lines of effort around which the coalition members are organized is first and foremost the military line for now. And that is both the bombing campaign, it's a training effort to get the Iraqi security forces up to speed, it's a training effort to begin to facilitate the work of Syrian elements to achieve success in their particular battle space. The second line of effort is in disrupting the finances of Daesh. And we can talk about that if you like during the Q&A. Daesh is nearly economically self-sufficient. And we have, through the work of many of the members of the coalition, worked to detach Daesh's capabilities to access the international financial system, to exploit the oil and energy that it has been able to gain and occupy through its military operations, and we shrunk the oil enterprise significantly. But there are other aspects of its financial capabilities which we're also attacking. The third area is stopping the flow of foreign fighters. And I've had the chance to speak with a number of the leaders in this room in the last day or so about the whole issue of foreign fighters. And it is from the process, from the point of radicalization across all of the legal measures necessary to make border controls tighter, to make transition from one state to another more difficult, and ultimately what to do with the foreign fighter when that individual returns. So in broad terms, it's from prevention through enforcement to rehabilitation and reintegration, the stopping of foreign fighters. The fourth area is in the area of stabilization. Those activities that are necessary to immediately take care of liberated populations that find that where we have been successful in moving Daesh out of a population, what do we do immediately to take care of that population, to rescue that population from what has just happened to it? In particular, medical care for women and children who have suffered incredible hardships at the hands of Daesh. And then quickly restoring essential services, water, electricity, some limited reconstruction. And I was just on the phone and on my communication systems this morning with a number of the countries who have representatives in this room, working issues immediately for opportunities in Iraq. And then the fifth area, and this is the area that I think is very important, because this is a long-term struggle. You said a decade. We'll be lucky if it's a decade, frankly. It's going to be longer than that. And that is the issue of counter-messaging. And counter-messaging, when it was initially intended, as it was initially inspired, was about countering the message of Daesh. In the end, it's about killing the message of Daesh. And we can have substantial effect in the battle space. We can have substantial effect in the military aggregation of all of our efforts inside this room to defeat Daesh militarily. But until we defeat the idea of Daesh, it will continue. And so the counter-messaging piece of the 5 lines of effort may be, in the end, the decisive arm of our activities. And all of them together, in a synchronized, globally applied manner, is the strategy ultimately to bring about the defeat. And I'll just say, this is an unusual coalition. It came together very quickly, 60 members, 2 partners. There are 29 national delegations represented at 2BS this year. 28 of them are in the coalition, and every one of them is providing important support in some form or another. The only delegation here not in the coalition is Russia. And if we're looking for common ground, frankly, where we can have opportunities to talk on issues and to plan about the future together, it is dealing with Daesh and the issues associated with Daesh and violent extremism, where Russia and the coalition and Russia and the members of the coalition have a lot of common ground to talk. So this is how we're organized, and that's our strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. You said that your job is also to turn the tide. Would you assess, or what is your assessment of, did you already kind of turn the tide, or in looking on the scale from 1 to 10, where are you? And we are of course hearing, so if I understood you correctly, that I wouldn't say easy, but quite a simple part will be to beat Daesh militarily, even though we are hearing statistics like 2,300 Humvees they have, 75% of flight sorties that are not dropping the bombs and the rockets. We are seeing, just observing what is happening in Ramadi with the dam. So these messages from the field are not very optimistic. And how can you how can you measure the number? It was published, 10,000 foreign fighters or people who were already eliminated by the coalition. Is this a success? And at the end, are we successful in stopping the flow of foreign fighters from our territories?
One of the things I learned as the commander of a theater of war was that you have to resist on any single given day a tactical outcome that can cause you to be pressured to change your strategic objectives. I really do believe, having seen this up close with the Taliban, and before that in another war, having seen it up close with Al-Qaeda, that our strategic objectives are right, that our lines of effort will create the right kind of aggregate pressure on Daesh over time that will defeat it. So I would call on individuals who would judge the success of the campaign based on the fall of Ramadi to say that the campaign has failed and that the strategy has failed. In fact, Ramadi has taught us a lot of lessons. And it's important to understand that the strategy shouldn't be judged by Ramadi, because the strategy relies on our training, the collective we, training the Iraqi security forces to take back those areas that Daesh has occupied. None of the forces in Ramadi had been trained by the coalition. But just up the river, the Euphrates River, about 30 kilometers, is in fact one of our training bases, where the Danes and the Americans and the Australians are training tribes and rotational units and the 7th Iraqi Army Division, and it is there that they're beating Daesh every day they fight them. And yes, many of our aircraft don't drop ordnance when they go up, but we still dropped over 4,300 sorties on many targets. The reason we don't drop isn't because of an absence of targets. It's because those targets often appear in an area where dropping will cause collateral damage to civilians. And we are very attentive now, after 13 years of war in a number of places, that you may kill Daesh, but you also may kill other people, which can create additional dynamics in the battle space that you just don't want to have to deal with later. And so we don't drop, not because we don't have the targets, it's because we are very careful not to take life, civilian, innocent life, when we do that. So let's keep an eye on the strategic horizon. Let's not judge the success or the failure of the campaign on any one tactical outcome. Let's learn from the battlefield in those areas where we've been successful, apply those lessons to our benefit, and where we've not been successful, let's take the lessons learned and roll those back into adjustments so that we can be successful.
Thank you. We heard about the global, how the global coalition is facing a terrorist threat deriving from Middle East, and if we should now move to trans-regional, transatlantic perspectives in direction of NATO. Dr. Bird, what is written in NATO counter-terrorism documents and strategies? What is NATO doing in regard to fight the threat of terrorism? And how NATO reshaped in recent years its system to face the threat of terrorism?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. But first of all, my thanks to the organisers for the invitation and for this sumptuous event and a multi-ministerial event. I usually deal with them on a one-by-one basis. There's plenty of them. The question you ask about NATO is actually a much bigger one, because it reflects on the overall global approach to counter-terrorism insofar as international organisations are concerned. NATO, as you know, invoked Article 5 for the only time in its history in 2001 for the response to the destruction of the Twin Towers and the attacks, the US. And following that, NATO had put in place a military concept for defence against terrorism, but it was not until 2012 that we had a political overarching guidance as to what allies thought NATO's role in countering terrorism was. And between the two, between 2001 and 2012, the UN had put in place a global counter-terrorism strategy which lays out jobs for everybody. It lays out jobs for countries, for regional organisations, and for international organisations. And of the four pillars, there are a couple that are really not playing to NATO's strengths, but there are also two where NATO's military and political abilities clearly tick some of the boxes. So when allies came to tell, to set out what NATO's role in countering terrorism was, they could draw on the strengths of NATO to fill niches in the UN Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy. And so our strategy, which is the Counter-Terrorism Policy Guidelines, has three pillars. The first is awareness of the threat. So this is the allies working together through information sharing, through intelligence sharing, through use of experts within the capitals to have a good appreciation of the threat and a common appreciation of the threat. The second pillar is capabilities. And when I think about it, it's usually in terms of NATO being able to carry on doing its work despite the threat from terrorism. So this is strengthening allied capabilities. It's ensuring that NATO can call on the right abilities in theatre, whether that be counter improvised explosive devices, hardening helicopters against man-pads, identification issues, CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear detection type systems. And the third and last, but to me really important pillar, is engagement. And that's engagement with partner nations, but also engagement with international organizations. And that is going back to my original point that NATO is only one of the collection of international and regional organizations who should be working together as a global approach. And we work closely with the UN, closely with the OSCE and EU, the Council of Europe. You are, on the whole, from partner nations, and you will know that through individual cooperation programs with NATO, partners express what it is they want to do with NATO. And amongst the list that you can draw from is counter-terrorism. And we have we've produced some literature, which I'm sure I can find you later, if that helps, of the issues that different nations have come to NATO for help with. And I think that this is, will perhaps join in with what General Allen said. A lot of work is, especially since the Wales summit, being focused on defence capacity building for partner nations. And much of that can be relevant to counter-terrorism. NATO, of course, being a whole-mill alliance, has meetings of ministers of foreign affairs and ministers of defence. But an awful lot of the counter-terrorism spectrum, over 90% of it in my view, is a civilian, domestic, national role. And there are other organisations that are new on the scene, such as the Global Counter-Terrorism Forum, who are doing extremely good work in putting together best practices, encouraging the world to look at the issue of countering violent extremism, of not enabling prisons to be used as hotbeds for radicalization and recruitment, work in various regions of the world. And for each of these topics, they have key areas that are necessary for countries to look at. A lot of them involve legislation, but also working with civil society and social groups.
Thank you. The Secretary General said that NATO has to face now two big spectrum of threats. One is to take care of collective security, and other one is doing with the crisis management. Do you see, and you said yourself, so basically NATO is just a facilitator for, like a forum for cooperation in regarding the counter-terrorism, not a tool for UN or for nations to do something in practice, if I understood you correctly. So is NATO going to stay on the path that it is right now, or do we see, or are we having in mind anything, there are any plans to do something in practice?
Well, when you refer to NATO, you're referring to a collection of 28 countries. And those 28 countries have to decide if NATO will do something. And it helps if there's a UN mandate. But I admit that at the moment the situation can be seen as frustrating from a NATO point of view, because we don't yet have a view that we are going to be able to add value to the current situations, be it in Iraq or Syria or Libya. In Iraq, CENTCOM is leading the Anti-ISIL coalition, and NATO speaks regularly to CENTCOM to ensure that we're not missing a trick, that we're not filling a gap that exists. But at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, it's the defence capacity building for Iraq that is likely to be the most effective thing that NATO can do, be that in country, be it in one of the neighbouring countries. On Syria, I would say that there is no overall global approach to it, and it is really hard to see how anyone could tell NATO to do something, since there is no overall plan of action. And Libya, we have agreements with the UN that we will take action in Libya, but at the moment the situation on the ground is such that it's impossible to do what we have already committed to do. So yes, it is frustrating, but NATO can't just launch into something because it thinks it should. Somebody, the 28 allies, have to agree that there is some added value for NATO to bring to the situation.
I think you just challenged General Allen that NATO is basically not part of the coalition, if I understood this correctly. They are the member states, but not the NATO.
All NATO states are members of the coalition, but we stay very close to NATO in terms of our consultation.
Thank you. Minister JOLEVSKI, your country with Kumanovo terrorist attacks just recently hit the headlines. We heard yesterday that it's still unclear what really happened, but having also these last terrorist attacks in mind, how prepared is Macedonian security system to face the terrorist threats? Is there some reshaping needed? Especially having in mind a statement by your president, who said that the barrier in process of joining the Macedonia to Euro-Atlantic perspective is one of the reasons where we can find the answers why Kumanovo happened.
Thank you very much. I would like to express thanks to the organizer of this wonderful event, and it's a great pleasure and privilege to be here with you today. Before answering the question, let me just in general speak about the desire and aspirations of the countries from the region, Macedonia, Montenegro, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, with special emphasis on my country, to join NATO, and why that's important for us, how we are contributing to the NATO operations and missions, and also to address your question. Macedonia has in Macedonia there is huge support for NATO membership, public support. Last polls are showing that 80% of the citizens of Macedonia are supporting Macedonian integration into NATO, and they are fully supporting the government efforts to come to that point. Also, when it comes to the political parties, there is consensus among all political parties about NATO membership, also EU membership for the country. We have started the MAP process 16 years ago, and Macedonia has done a lot of reforms in order to be able to get invitation to join NATO. As you know, we are very close in 2008 to get invitation together with Croatia and Albania, but unfortunately because of the so-called name issue, we didn't get that invitation. Macedonia military has done a lot of reforms and is well prepared. I will share with you one of comments of one of my former colleagues. Before I became ambassador to Washington, I used to be leading some consulting projects in the area of trade policies in the region, especially in Macedonia, for Buzan and Hamilton. At the same time, that company was consultant company for the reforms in Macedonian army. Before I went to Washington, I asked my colleague in Skopje, but also in Washington, about how they assess as a colleagues the reforms in the army. and they said to me that the country is fully prepared, the army is fully prepared to join NATO. Macedonia is part of ISAF mission, was part of the ISAF mission from day one until last year. We are also part of Resolute Support. We were per capita fourth biggest contributor for many years in ISAF mission. Total number of Macedonian officers and soldiers is about 7,500 of them, and 3,800 have been deployed either in Afghanistan or in Iraq. It shows that Macedonia is a security provider, not security consumer. For the quality of our contribution, I will share with you one of the missions what we had in Afghanistan in ISAF mission. It was a so-called Phoenix mission together with National Guard of Vermont, where 89 Macedonian officers and soldiers were fully embedded in National Guard of Vermont in combat mission in Afghanistan. When I say fully embedded, it means unit of 10, 5 Macedonian, 5 Americans. Vehicle of 4, 2 Macedonian, 2 Americans. When you go to combat operation and you have a soldier next to you, shoulder to shoulder, you have to trust to him. It shows that Macedonian army is ready and we are contributing to bring peace and stability and strengthen democracy in the other parts of the world. Also, when it comes, I would like to share with you, I was Chief of Staff of President Tarkovsky when the US Ambassador came and asked us to join the ISAF mission. My boss didn't think a second. He said, yes, we'll part of that coalition. After that, we had 2 different presidents. We had probably 8 different compositions of the government and the parliament. And it was always support for our participation. We never, for each rotation in our parliament, we vote. We never had a single vote against our participation to ISAF. When it comes to the integration of the countries from Southeastern Europe, it's about security, stability, and prosperity of the countries. We believe, if you look at the big picture, and big picture in this moment is to have our friends from Montenegro into NATO, to have Macedonia into NATO, and to have Bosnia starting with map process. If you have that picture in the front, you'll see that the region will be much more secure and much more stable. It's about values, and we believe that we are sharing those values. Of course, we are not perfect. In certain periods, we have some challenges, but we are fully committed to work to overcome those challenges. The goal of the government, and that's a request of the people also, which is very important, to bring Macedonia as soon as possible into NATO. On the issue of Kumano, a couple of times was raised, and I will share with you the assessment what we have in this moment. We are working, the investigation is still going on. It was a group of criminals, bandits, whatever title we'll give them after the investigation. It was a group of around 40 of them, mainly from outside of Macedonia. There were just 9 Macedonian citizens as a part of that group. Heavily armed. They were using RPGs, snipers, and other weapons. A lot of ammunition. We have lost 8 Macedonian policemen in that activity. But also we showed, it was almost 28 hours activity, we showed that we have a capable, professional, well-trained policemen to deal with such a threats. The evidence for that, even in such a difficult urban fighting, we didn't have a single civilian casualty. That also we paid price for that because we have to be very careful. It shows that the institutions are having capacity, but of course, after every event such that, you have to review what happened, how you can further improve. You mentioned the statement of President Ivanov. As a minister, I'm not here to comment his statement, but I will just share my view. You know, we spoke about how those terrorists are acting, and whenever they see there is some security vacuum, some of them might get ideas to use that momentum. I'm pretty sure if Macedonia would have been member of NATO, Kumano would not have happened. So, in this kind, when we speak about NATO in the region, it's about security. And Macedonia, since 2008, although has fulfilled all criteria to get the invitation, is in some kind of the security vacuum because we are not members of alliance. I can assure you that we will continue to work very hard to find mutually acceptable solutions with our neighbor from south. But believe me, it's very difficult, especially in this period, to move forward. That's it. If you some questions, I'm at your disposal.
Thank you. Yesterday we heard the director of Serbian Intelligence Security Agency when he was saying a lot of very interesting things. One of those was that he mentioned how good is intelligence cooperation and intelligence exchange in the region. And my question goes, we all heard a lot about need for cooperation, but what went wrong in this concrete case? And now a very specific question also for you, and I will reiterate the previous one. Is there a need for reform within the security system of Macedonia because of this incident, or do you see a possibility that the estimate will be that this happened due to the, I don't know what kind of type of reasons, and being Minister of Defense, what is actually the role of Ministry of Defense in facing with the threat of terrorism in Macedonia?
First, you have mentioned about the need of cooperation between intelligence services all around in the region, but I would say all around the world. That's very important. That's crucial because those people, no matter what title we give them, terrorists, organized crime, bandits, and so on, they don't recognize the borders. They cooperate across the borders. Therefore, it's extremely important that we share the intelligence information what we have and cooperate in order to stop such a kind of activities. I'm relatively new in this job. One of my first trips abroad was in Italy, and my Italian colleague said, Mr. Minister, we have 7 Macedonian Italian citizens who are fighting on side of ISIS. It shows that, because those probably have double citizenship, it shows that we have to work together to find, to improve our cooperation, especially in the region, to prevent those people who have different views, different values from our values, to do the harm to the societies. As you mentioned, your question was, as a Ministry of Defense, what's our role? In Macedonia, there is a specific regulation how the army could be used to support the police. The primary task for dealing with such a threat, it goes with Ministry of Interior, with police, but also there is a very specific and detailed regulation about the use of the army in such events. For Kumano, army was not used at all.
Thank you. Last but not least, our dear host, Minister Pejanović Đurišić. Montenegro in recent years became a factor of regional stability and security. In the last few years, you made a lot of changes in your national security system, also in the Ministry of Defense. Do you think that this reshaped system is capable of preventing incidents, as we spoke about just recently, before they happen? Is there any additional need to reshape your national security system? Even though we heard today and we heard yesterday that having in mind the accession to NATO, security and defense reforms are basically, so to speak, there where they are supposed to be. Please.
Well, first of all, let me greet everyone and express my real, I would say, appreciation for all of you who participate in this year's forum, and the forum so far was very successful. It was successful from the point that the right topics have been chosen to discuss with them, and that actually the organizers who were helped by us from the government of Montenegro have been able to make a choice of the topics which are really important, not only from the national, regional, but from the global point of view. And I'm sure that this unique opportunity in the region to share our views and opinions on the current developments, challenges and threats would be having its follow-up in our further enhanced cooperation when it comes to these issues. On the other side, of course, definitely the forum served as a platform for recognizing everything Montenegro has achieved in the last couple of years, and we didn't ask that intentionally. It just came as a result of all debates and discussions, and that is why we are very much appreciative of every positive words we've been getting from all of you. And you know us, that will be a further motivation and incentive for our further actions. Actually, you said that Montenegro is recognized and stable and secure in the last couple of years. I wouldn't agree. Montenegro has been recognized, and Montenegro does have that tradition not only for the last couple of years or for the last couple of decades. We just heard in the previous session one very inspirative, I would say, contribution from the part of our President of the Parliament, who reminded us all that there is a long history of the ways and manners how different issues related with multiculturalism at the first place were handled in Montenegro. So we do believe that one of the very important values we are bringing inherently in our society is that one, the value of tolerance, the value of being able to find the ways and means for the dialogue in every possible critical situation. Recently, I mean relatively recently, it has been shown through everything we passed in the 90s. Well, we do all have a tendency to forget the events because they are so following each other in such a pace that it's not that easy to focus. But we shouldn't be forgetting the fact that in all these atrocities that were coming around the spaces of ex-Yugoslavia, Montenegro maintained to preserve internal peace and stability. And it didn't happen just like that. So there was some base for that and some efforts that were put together, and we do believe that we should be using these traditional values in all segments of our development nowadays in the future, and that we can bring this kind of know-how for the more global approach to the security and other challenges which we are facing together. Actually, it's not that easy. Of course, we are all very well aware that all the security challenges, new developments, threats, they are very complex. And they are somehow targeting to jeopardize what is in the very core, for example, of the Charter of the United Nations, which is in the very core of what democratic societies are. So from that point, our responsibility is even greater. But our responsibility is to find the right strategy to counter all these issues which are so violent in the last couple of years. And we've got to find the means, not only, as General Allen was telling us, to have military actions and to definitely try, when we already need to have military actions for them to be successful, but all these actions should be followed by something which will be a more holistic approach to what is the real core of the problem. So there, I'm very much struck, for example, with the fact that when we are looking on what Daesh is, or ISIL, or whatever we call it, And by the way, the fact that we are changing the names also means something, that we've got to work more on understanding what is in the core and what is going on. But back to what I wanted to say is that I'm really very, very much struck and worried with the fact that the majority of those people who are engaged in those actions whose violence is something we never seen before are very young ones. They are something in the age span from 16 to 26, 25, and that is a sign and a fact by itself. So what we are talking there about, whether maybe it is some kind of generational problem, we are also facing the fact that their families are not in that direction developing, that their parents are not supporting what they are doing. So socioeconomically, maybe culturally, we are having a problem which is something like generational nihilism or something like that. So we've got to face that in a different manner. Of course, military is there, but I don't believe that the final effects, positive ones, could be achieved only by military actions. We've got to do more. We've got to do more in education. We've got to do more with media. We've got to do more with dialogue and all kinds of discussions. And being someone who is, of course, primarily telecommunications engineer, I'm very much concerned with the fact that you also right now had that introduction about new technologies as something which is served by those who are at the side of terrorism. So I'm very much worried that we shouldn't be making that kind of amalgam, and we should be more clever than that. More clever in the sense that we should be using those technologies to explain to the people, to get closer to them, and actually not to use them as a platform where we will be having more fear around because we are watching all these awful scenes of violence. We've got to use them to explain to the people how wrong it is all about, that there is no real idea because what is in the core of all these actions, which some of them are calling in different ways, relating it with religion or something like that. So from that point as well, we've got to be very careful to use the right wording, to use the right terms, to have the right definitions, to respect what might be all the difference possible, and then to have the chance for the dialogue and for the discussions and to design somehow this kind of a comprehensive approach where we will be looking beyond what is the current situation in all these areas.
Thank you, Minister. I fully agree with you that Montenegro is a role model of a modern civic state. And these values of these states are attacked, as you mentioned yourself, directly. We saw it or we read it in the news, how one young man from Bar threatened 3 political figures, I think, in Montenegro. And what was interesting to me that he really specifically with the names target very exact persons, which is quite a new, I would say. So how do you see that? And as I said in my first question, do you see Montenegrin security system in a position that it will be the one who will do its job in preventing the threats that were posed through the internet?
Of course, that I believe that all the reforms we have been implementing for years now are effective, and from that point, definitely the fact that we were in MAP, that we are now in the process of intensifying and focused dialogue with NATO is very much helping, and it's something which brings us additional opportunities to do what is necessary. And of course to be in a close cooperation and contact with all partners when it comes to security and the intelligence area. But I think that you could see from my previous answer that I don't believe just in what is the function of security system. I more believe in what is the society, what is the whole environment, political, intellectuals, cultural, and we've got to have all people involved in maintaining what is that inherent capacity and advantage of Montenegro as a society where a high level of tolerance and mutual understanding is present, and it's got to be kept like that. So from that point, even the individual threats will be always, of course, having a response which is the response from all of us, no matter in which parties we are, no matter whether or not we are belonging to any religions, different cultures, national belongings or whatever. So from that point, I believe much more in this capacity of one society than just what is, of course, something necessary to be done from the part of the state and the state institutions, which are, fortunately, I said, due to this very intensive reform process, something now which is much more different than it was in the past, very much aware of what they got to do, very much linked and connected with more powerful services, not only in the region but globally, and that is something which, of course, is the reason why we do believe that facing the global threats, you can't have the real responses if you are not a part of a global alliances, whatever they are called, and in this case, with Montenegro is concerned, completely in line what is our orientation when it comes to our further development in all senses, which is definitely orientation towards EU and NATO. So from that point, I mean, the choices were made and the opportunities are used very widely even at this moment.
Thank you. With that strong message, I open floor for the Q&A session. Any questions? Please, sir. Here.
Ariel Cohen, the Atlantic Council. I am speaking of the next panel, but I cannot help but ask General Allen, which is, of course, a great opportunity here. How do you see your coalition succeeding in Africa, where you have Libya and Sahel under a lot of pressure from type of violent extremists you are fighting? Thank you.
That's a very important question. Let me just take the floor for a second to make two quick points. The first is I hope everyone listened very closely to Madam Minister's assessment of how we get at the underlying causes of Daesh and ISIL, because it is a symptom. It is not the disease. And we're going to be dealing with Al-Qaeda and Daesh and ISIL and other organizations like this for a very long time until we get at the solutions to and the remedies to the disease, and the minister's explanation of that was very important. The social, political, religious undercurrents that left unresolved for so long a period of time facilitate the rapid radicalization of our youth. Saving our children has got to be one of our top priorities, and they become members of extreme organizations, and then we fight them. And there is a way to solve that. The minister's explanation was superb. To your question specifically, when we organized the coalition was organized to deal with Daesh in an area of Iraq and Syria. And we call that core ISIL. The phenomenon that has evolved in the aftermath of this initial organization is what is sometimes euphemistically called the global expansion of Daesh. At this juncture, there are probably about 70 different organizations that have chosen to fly the black flag of Daesh. And they're found in many places around the world. As we, the coalition, seek to embrace and to understand what this emergence or expansion of Daesh actually means and how we'll deal with it. We consider that there are several tests that you can apply to a particular organization. And remember, my baseline here is the reason we organize, which is to fight ISIL, not just to fight any organization that emerges as an extremist organization. So our focus was relatively narrow at the time. But the tests that we apply to an organization beyond core ISIL is first and foremost, can the core exercise command and control in some form or another over that distant organization. And by the way, these organizations that are emerging not because of Daesh or ISIL, they're emerging because of the so-called caliphate. Now they existed anyway, in many cases, and some of them are nothing more than criminal gangs or contained insurgencies. But some of them have emerged and gained momentum because they have chosen to align themselves with the caliphate, and the caliphate and these organizations are in a dialogue, some of them, with the idea of their being designated as what are known as distant provinces. And so when we apply these measures, the first and foremost is, can the core exert command and control over the distant province? Number two, is there a capacity for the core and that entity to exchange resources? In other words, can the core send funding to that distant element? And can that distant element generate resources to send to the core to support? Third area is, can they transfer and exchange fighters? Is there a migration of foreign fighters either from the distant elements to the core or from the core out? And we've seen both. And the last is, do they share a common narrative? In other words, does that distant element now blend into the central narrative of the caliphate? Remember, the doctrine of the caliphate calls for it to be constantly expanding its territory and constantly expanding the population that it will subjugate. And so that's the general measure that we apply. And as we deal with these organizations or seek to understand them and bring to bear power, the first and foremost is we seek to understand what is being done locally with respect to a particular organization. And my friends here on the panel, many of our countries that are represented here, where you are experiencing, in particular, Libya, or the Sinai, or Boko Haram, or fill in the blank. There's a long list. We've already gone well down the road in many respects, and now I'll speak as an American as opposed to a member of the coalition, where we have established bilateral or multilateral regional relationships with the exchange of information or the exchange of intelligence or the exchange of capacity or capacity building to deal with it locally or to deal with it regionally. But then beyond that, we may well ultimately determine, because it is considered a legitimate offshoot of core Daesh, that upon the strong foundation of activities already underway, we may want to shift or pivot capabilities of the coalition to be brought to bear locally. And we don't envision right now that probably that would be a shift of military capacity, but we do think that in the areas of countering finances, in the areas of impeding the flow of foreign fighters, and in the area of attacking and disrupting the narrative, those are three areas that are not resource intensive, but by virtue of the nature of the electronic and virtual capacity of our combined nations to go to work against a financial infrastructure, or to go to work against foreign fighter flows, or to attack a narrative, there is the potential for the coalition to pivot capabilities to assist regionally or locally. And to this point, that decision has not been made in any one case. But if it were to be contemplated, my guess would be that we would start in Libya. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Please, Damir. First row, microphone.
Evo ja, pošto ne smijem postaviti pitanje svojoj ministarki, postavit ću generalu Alenu. Gospodine generale, imajući u vidu prije svega i sadašnju dužnost i dužnost koju ste obavljali u Afganistanu, kakav je utjecaj islamske države po vama trenutno u Afganistanu, kakav je odnos predstavnika islamske države, tog pokreta sa talibanima i da li po vama vidite mogućnost da u jednom trenutku utjecaj islamske države bude veći u područjima gdje nije prisustvo talibana kao što je na sjeveru Afganistana i da u određenom trenutku dođe do sukoba između predstavnika islamske države i samih talibana?
This goes to the question I just answered a moment ago. There is a move afoot in the area of Afghanistan and Pakistan in an ancient area that was organized hundreds of years ago called the Khorasan, which is gaining prominence within the narrative of the caliphate and may in fact be designated by the caliphate as a province. Not long ago I had the opportunity to speak with His Excellency President Ashraf Ghani, who is an old friend, and we talked specifically about the growing concern that he has that in addition to the Taliban and the complexity of that organization, we're beginning to see the growth of the Khorasan elements of Daesh finding itself being able to put down roots in that area. Your question also presupposed that there is the potential for conflict between the Taliban and Khorasan, and that's in fact what we are seeing. Their objectives are very different. The Taliban by themselves tend to be more local or regional. They don't have inherent to their doctrine a necessary affinity to be part of a larger organization like the Caliphate. And so we will probably continue to see local tensions and local confrontation between the emerging element of Daesh in that area and the Taliban, as the Taliban seeks to continue its efforts to carve out its own place, either through the peace process or through control of territory for some permanent set down in Afghanistan. But we're going to see this in other places as well, where there are standing insurgencies that are very local in nature, but those insurgencies will now find themselves in competition with the emergence of an affiliate of Daesh, which is taking command and control from the core, is being resourced from outside the theater, maybe even has foreign fighters flowing to assist them. And we will probably see that in other places as well.
Thank you. Because we started late, so we'll use few minutes with and I would like to close the panel with the closing remarks of each of the panelists, if they wish to do so. But before that, I would just give the floor to the lady in the back row to ask the question, and then we will start also by answering this question, the final tour de table around the panel. Please.
Poštovanje, moje ime je Milica Marinović i radim za Al Jazeera Balkan, medijsku grupu. Mene zanima pitanje za gospodina generala, kakva je vaša procjena ISIL-a i njegovog utjecaja baš na Balkan konkretno? Mi smo juče mogli čuti neke ocjene ministara vanjskih poslova regije, gdje oni uslovno naravno jesu zabrinuti, ali recimo imajući u vidu neke video poruke koje su se u posljednje vrijeme pojavile i koje su upućene baš targetirane na ljude sa Balkana da se pridruže ovoj grupi ili da sprovedu neke akcije na samom Balkanu, koliko je zapravo, gospodine Allen, Balkan ugrožen od ISIL-a? To je pitanje za vas, a za gospodina iz Makedonije, pošto juče nisam imala priliku da ga pitam, s obzirom na, može se reći, pomalo osjetljivu trenutnu situaciju u Makedoniji, makar zbog ovoga što se desilo u Kumanovu, da li se vi bojite od ove prijetnje? To je to, hvala.
Was the first, I didn't get this on right away, was the first part of the question to
Yes,
me?
it was threat ISIL poses to the Balkans.
I got most of it, thank you. It's a good, very important question. I've had the chance to travel at this point to 25 of the capitals out of the 62 members. And I'm going to continue as time goes on. One of the things I find really heartening about this region and the Balkans is the enormity of the religious, ethnic diversity that is simply characteristic of who the people are, regardless of your national identity, who the people are in this region. And because of that, and because of the ancient history of this diversity, relatively speaking, it has created for the countries of this region opportunities to deal with multi-religious societies and multi-sectarian, multi-ethnic societies in ways that many other areas within the coalition, and again, I've traveled extensively within the 60 states and 2 partners, either haven't yet had to deal with or haven't dealt with. And when I think about what's happening here, again to the minister's explanation, which was really superb, about what Daesh is and what it represents and how we solve the issue of Daesh, I see much of what I would want to see elsewhere in the coalition already occurring here. And that is, you are actively and aggressively embracing in this region the whole business of the countering of violent extremism, which goes to the issue of aggressive outreach to families, outreach to religious leaders, outreach to teachers and clerics, outreach to former members of returned fighters who have been reintegrated into society, and using them ultimately to be a very clear voice for societal integration. Many of the states in this region have undertaken aggressive legislative reform to give you the legal tools necessary to deal with the flow of foreign fighters. If you think about being a foreign fighter and you voice that in some countries, that is reason enough for you to be held accountable legally under your systems. And that improvement here has, the concentration of that improvement here has been very important, and again, love to see it elsewhere in the coalition. And then I think another area that's very important is, because this is a region of compassionate people as well as well-organized states, is how you deal with returned fighters. You know, the single sanction of interminable detention simply can't be the solution. Because as we all know, many of these prisons, or many of these detention centers where these fighters end up, become PhD awarding institutions in jihadism. And that can't be the solution. What has to be the solution is, and some people have to be detained because you'll never fix the wiring again. They're just going to be that way forever. But many of you have demonstrated, I think, important leadership in the whole business of rehabilitation and reintegration. So if you look at the business of foreign fighters, it isn't linear, really, where you start at the point of radicalization and try to prevent that, and then you end at the point of reintegration. It's not linear, it's actually circular, where you're attempting through countering violent extremism and addressing the issues that Madam Minister talked about. And then you apply legal measures either to hold people accountable or make border controls more difficult, and then we fight them in the battlefield, and then when they come home, you hold them accountable again, but then you rehabilitate them and reintegrate them. And some of what we have found is the most powerful influences to prevent radicalization of our youth are the voices of the foreign fighters that have managed to come home and been rehabilitated. And I will tell you, Daesh has killed hundreds of foreign fighters, hundreds of them, because this jihadist utopia that many of our young children thought that they would achieve by going to be part of the caliphate has turned out to be a jihadist nightmare. And everyone in this room should be enraged at Daesh, the fact that it exists and what it has done to our fellow humans. We should be enraged and forever be enraged and never accept this as the new normal. And these fighters are coming back when they escape, when they are able to get out, they come back and they're ready for a compassionate society to re-embrace them. And again, some will never be changed. But they become the powerful voices to prevent our children from being beguiled by social media. And Daesh's very explicit, modern approach in a medieval society, the caliphate, to take our children from us.
Thank you. Short closing remarks. Mr. JOLEVSKI, please.
Okay, I believe that for the region, for Southeastern Europe, it's extremely important that the process of Euro-Atlantic integrations continues. The more NATO and EU in the region, the more stable the region is. The countries from the region, they work hard in order to achieve those goals. And I'm pretty sure, I can speak on behalf of Macedonia, but I'm pretty sure that the other countries, they pay very big importance to Euro-Atlantic integrations, to integrations into NATO and European Union, and I can assure you that we will continue on that path.
Thank you. Dr. Bird.
Thank you. Well, my closing thought is that the world is made up of sovereign nations, and those sovereign nations can get together in various formats to do different jobs. And I think there are enough tools in the way of formats out there to tackle most things, including this. And the Anti-ISIL coalition that is built on the interoperability established through standardization agreements, exercising, having interoperable kit and procedures, is just an illustration of how what is already in place can be turned slightly to be used for a new goal. So it's a question of picking the right tool for the right job. But I go fully in line with Minister Milić's comment about the big issue behind it all. The big issue behind it all is that there is an increasing percentage of the population who don't see the sense in life, who don't, who are open to something to fill the void that they're living, and are open to the attractiveness of violence. And clearly, we're not doing enough to instill critical thinking and tolerance. And so it comes back for me, my personal view is that it's the education end of the cycle where so much more has to be done by all of us. Thank you.
And again, last but not least, Madam Minister, please.
Well, I believe that even in this discussion we showed what is the essential, and the essential is that we should be aware that we are facing the threats which are well beyond the strategies and the ways of operating we are used for. So we've got to go beyond what is the traditional way of somehow border limited perception of security, and to further on develop and enhance cooperation between different countries in the region, in the alliance, and try to go beyond what is just military response to all these challenges, and try to work for different strategies. Of course, what General Allen said, it's about stopping the financial means, stopping the flow of foreign fighters, rehabilitation in the sense when we are having some problems of that kind, try to counterattack the narrative. But I do believe that we should be even more innovative and inventive on the means and ways, and that's where I also believe that NATO is a place where we could discuss more about what is the key word of the nowadays world, and it's innovation. So why don't have innovation in security?
With that, again, strong message. Thank you everybody for participation in this panel with our superb panelists, and we continue after a short coffee break.